Welcome to the roundtable. We're talking trade today. We're in the final stretch of a high stakes negotiation between Canada and the United States to reach a trade deal. Some big news on the trade front this week. Japan inking a significant initial agreement with the president. What does this all say about Canada's prospects? To break it down, we're joined by Sean Speer, my co-founder and editor at large. Sean, great to have you on the program.
Yeah, always great to connect on the roundtable, Roger.
Let's talk about trade, Sean. We saw a big agreement. Well, you never know these agreements. I think they're outlines of agreements between the United States and Japan. And I wonder what this says about where Canada is at in its negotiations with the United States. As Sean, we zero in now on the final week before potentially a 35% tariff is levied on Canadian goods into the United States not covered by the current NAFTA agreement.
Yeah, I don't want to sound romantic, Roger, but I think I speak for both of us when I say, we're generally predisposed to markets and open exchange and economics rather than politics dictating the relationship between consumers and sellers and between different countries in most cases. And what struck me about the Japan deal, in addition to some of the others we've seen in recent days, is the extent to which they represent, in my mind, the kind of end of free trade. They are, I think, properly understood as exercises in managed trade, where in order to maintain access to the U.S. markets, these countries are committing to a series of things that, all things being equal, they probably wouldn't commit to. That Trump's conception of trade is not a decentralized one where consumer preferences and investment decisions and so on are really at the center of the economy, but where politicians and politics guide those decisions in a top-down way. And so it makes you wonder what might be in store for Canada. What type of non-economic commitments are we going to have to make in order to secure access to U.S. market? Are we going to have to, hand over critical minerals to the United States by way of agreement, and that transcends economic decision making? Are we going to have to commit to public expenditure on certain Trump priorities? Are we going to have to let his hotels back into the country? That seems silly, but once you accept the premise that politics rather than economics is at the heart of
Right.
these decisions, then almost by definition everything is on the table.
Yeah, let me be even a little bit more blunt here. You look at the Indonesian deal now, the Japan deal. These are shakedowns. These are not trade agreements. Indonesia, gets a 19% tariff versus a 30% tariff because they're buying 50 Boeing commercial planes and making agreements for other future deals. Japan gets a 15% tariff versus 25 on the basis that ostensibly they're going to make $500 billion of investments in the United States. We don't know if that's a re-announcement of SoftBank, a big Japanese kind of investment funds, investments that it provisionally has already committed to. So again, tons of details to work out here, but the underlying message is clear. As you say, this has nothing to do with dealing with real trade irritants or making trade relations more efficient and effective vis-a-vis two parties. It is the United States extracting under the threat of tariffs, non-tariff economic blackmail that will be paid as tribute to the president to advance his political agenda. And presumably, what is that all about? It's about the midterms and then, either his reelection prospects or, some other Republican president. That's what at least we could hope for these days. So, Sean, do you think I have that right? Is that too blunt?
No.
I feel like it's a spectacle, and it's a spectacle that goes to the heart, I think, of probably the very difficult conversations that Mark Carney and his team are having with their U.S. counterparts right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I've been dismissive of the tendency to characterize Trump as having authoritarian instincts or tendencies or whatever. I think we ought to be careful about how we we think about these issues. But one way in which he does ape or mimic non-democratic political leaders is precisely what we're talking about. He has a modus operandi to want to inject politics in issues that typically are outside the scope of the state or outside the scope of politics. Not only is, as you say, is he's using these trade negotiations to secure non-trade or non-economic concessions from countries, he's doing that with American institutions, right? We're speaking the same week that the administration was able to essentially extract a $200 million payment out of Columbia University for stuff popping on Columbia campus, which, don't get me wrong, I'm opposed to. But there are proper channels to go about addressing it, not in these kind of quid pro quos. I'm speaking to you from New York City. Some of the listeners and viewers will know that my wife works in big law here. The administration has done that with a bunch of law firms who essentially were forced to make payouts to the administration in order to protect their ability to work for clients in the federal system and secure federal contracts. And those payouts were done principally because those firms had lawyers working there who had previously been involved in part of Trump's prosecution. So it's a long way of saying, if you were trying to steelman the argument that Trump is authoritarian or has sort of soft authoritarian instincts, it's these instances where he uses the power of the state to either penalize his foes domestically or in the context of foreign economic policy, extract concessions that go beyond how we normally think about open markets and economic exchange.
Yeah, and he came back this week to get another bite of the apple at CBS. He had extracted, north of, I forget what the number was it $20 million in some bogus lawsuit against 60 Minutes for not releasing the entirety of the Kamala Harris video as it appeared. Anyway, it was obviously settled by the network because there's a larger multi-billion-dollar merger going on behind the scenes. And guess what? Before the merger was approved this week, he got another $20 million in free advertising across the Paramount CBS network. So let's bring this back to Canada. If you're Mark Carney and you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, we're a long way from Kananaskis, honey. We are well down the road here. I can see a bunch of deals that have gone down. Maybe I'm worried that no one is really showing much backbone here. Indonesia, you could say, yeah, they're going to roll over. Japan, that's not an insignificant trading partner for the United States. Yes. And the fact that they've, seemingly rushed to the White House to get a deal first, Sean, it would set you up for, I guess, a really tough kind of binary choice, which is, do I go the Japan route? And we're hearing rumors that there may be an EU deal that, is similar to the Japanese deal, major concessions in turn for, regardless, a tariff rate of less than threatened, but still a not insignificant tariff. Or do you, as the government seems to be telegraphing, saying, hey, wait a second, we're not going to go for the quick and dirty shakedown, courtesy of Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary. We're gonna tough this out a bit. We're gonna try to go a round or two to see if we can extract some concessions on the basis that a lot of important swing states, Ohio and others,
yes,
their largest exporter is us, is Canada. We do have some leverage. And I guess my question to you is, do you think we're going to try to use it?
I increasingly think so. For some of the reasons we've just discussed, for some of the reasons we've discussed in the past, including the extent to which the administration may feel that it's in a weaker position as it approaches the midterms, or maybe some of these other issues, including the Epstein files, continue to dog the president. But the other reason that I don't think should be underestimated is that Mark Carney is no longer a technocrat. He's a politician. And he's a politician representing a coalition of supporters, many of whom voted for him on the basis that he would represent Canadian interests more strongly than Pierre Poilievre vis-a-vis the Trump administration. And so he's already taken some blows domestically for concessions on the digital services tax and some of the other issues that have been associated with these negotiations. If we get a deal, Rudyard, particularly one that doesn't eliminate tariffs, that leaves some tariffs in place, and it comes to light that he's committed to some kind of shakedown quid pro quo, I think there's a risk that he bleeds support, particularly on his left flank. And so I suspect that he's got two voices on his shoulder: the technocrat saying the data are clear, we need to preserve access to the U.S. market, it will do real harm to Canada's economy if we don't have it, and the political voice saying, if we mishandle this, you could be a one-term prime minister. And so I think for that reason, the incentives push Carney in the direction of delay and punting, rather than a compromise deal that I think could really represent serious political risk to him.
Just to play devil's advocate with that for a moment, what if the Japanese and the Indonesians, frankly, are just acknowledging the world for the way it is, as opposed to the world that we might want it to be? And there's no putting Humpty Dumpty back together again here. The reality is, yeah, we could try to go a round or two, but the relationship's so asymmetrical. And who knows, even worse, what if he tries to make an example of us? He's talked about us as the 51st state. He's said at various times, somewhat brutally, we don't need anything from Canada. I could be much harder on these people, but I'm just choosing to be nice right now. We've got his ambassador this week saying, that Canadians are nasty in their kind of their dealings vis-a-vis and comments about the president, and that Canadian businesses should be championing, the president and his, just crazy talk, to think some business leader is going to come forward and speak in favor of how the president is handling the bilateral trade relationship with Canada. But I just go back to that point, Sean. Are the Japanese and the Indonesians, as depressing as it is, seeing things, more clearly for what they are? And yes, I would be the first one to shake my fist, not at Mark Carney, but definitely at Donald Trump, if we, for instance, get sucked into tens of billions of dollars into this ridiculous Golden Dome. Say, maybe it's not Boeing planes, maybe it's not Japanese car makers opening plants in the United States. Maybe it's something even more transactional. I want to build a Golden Dome. You're going to pay for, a lot of it. Yes. Tens of billions to start, maybe hundreds of billions to come. And it's all technology that's not proven against a threat that is, frankly, a lot lower than a lot of other important national defense and security threats that we face, from terrorism to, a worst case scenario, land incursions from the Russians in our high Arctic. I don't know, Sean, how do you square that between looking at the world the way it is, but then having to accept the butcher's bill, which is probably to spend a lot of money doing something really, really dumb?
Yeah, as I said, Roger, I think that is one of the voices on his shoulder, the central bank realist. But I think the difference maybe between Canada and Japan and Indonesia is precisely something you raised earlier, and it's the politics of the 51st state stuff.
Right.
That the rise of nationalist sentiment, particularly within Carney's own coalition, I just think makes it so hard for him to maneuver independent of some of the things we've been talking about today. When you add those unknowns to the list, I just think his scope for getting a deal done involves, I think, just huge political trade-offs. And while Mark Carney's not a politician, a lot of the people in and around him are traditional political types. And one wonders if actually counterintuitively they might think that not getting a deal done, and kind of being able to demonstrate how strong he's proven in standing up to President Trump may be, at least in the short term, more in Carney's interest than accepting a deal that comes with it significant political risk.
Final question. We know that right now, the threatened levy of 35% tariffs on Canadian imports in the United States is on goods outside of CUSMA, outside of
Yes.
the successor to NAFTA. And that due to these tariff threats over the last number of months, a whole bunch of exporters have now become CUSMA compliant. And I've read something like, I don't know, are we approaching 90% of all goods now going into the United States are CUSMA compliant? It's up almost, 15 odd, 20%, since before this crisis started. So I don't know. I wonder, like, it could be like a huge nothing burger. Like, so what? Bring on 35% tariffs against 10% of all Canadian exports. I guess what's more serious, Sean, is the sectoral stuff, right? Cars,
Yes.
autos, aluminum, steel. Um, these, I guess, maybe don't go away, but could we possibly? I want to end on an optimistic note. Could we have like a nice little piece of kabuki theater acted out between these two leaders, where Trump looks tough, he levels the 35%, but the fact is, what the blended rate, even when you add in all the autos and the aluminum and the steel, maybe it works out to 10% of all, if you applied it that blended rate as a volume of total trade. This thing's a nothing burger.
Yeah, I think it's a great insight, a great way to wrap up this segment of the conversation. For those listeners and viewers who don't follow these things closely, in our conversations with the University of Toronto economist Joseph Steinberg, a real trade policy expert, he explains that before Trump's tariffs, there were a lot of Canadian exporters who were deciding not to take the steps necessary to bring their exports into CUSMA compliance because the tariffs that they were being subject to were so low outside of the CUSMA that it wasn't worth the administrative cost to bring them into compliance. Now, as they face tariff threats outside of the agreement, that trade-off changes. And so, as you say, we've gone from something like two-thirds of exports into the United States from Canada within the CUSMA to now something like 90%. And so there's a kind of counterintuitive, crazy way in which you could, I think, without too much effort, make the case that Donald Trump has done more to sustain and strengthen genuinely free trade between our two countries than almost anyone by increasing the relative benefits of the free trade agreement for Canadian exporters. The challenge, of course, is we know that CUSMA could be up in 2026, and so that may only be a kind of temporary reprieve. But as you say, I think in the short term, when you combine that with some of the political trade-offs for Prime Minister Carney, I think we're going to blow through this August 1st deadline without a deal. And the government will make the bet that both economically and politically, that's more in its interest than doing some shakedown deal like the Japanese or the Indonesians.
Yeah. Well, the hub is going to be here for each and every step as we rush up to this deadline and then possibly beyond. Sean, we're going to say goodbye to our complimentary listeners and viewers. If you're enjoying the Hub Roundtable, either on our podcast channel or YouTube feed, please consider becoming a Hub Hero. For $1 a week, you get all of our best paid content, including our full-length podcast with David Frum. Sean had an excellent conversation with him this week. You can catch the first half of that on our YouTube channel and podcast feed. But if you want the second half of David Frum, the second half of the Roundtable, the entirety of our daily news brief Hub headlines, become a Hub Hero. You also get all of our best paid content on our website and the daily newsletters, weekly newsletters, whatever you like of your choice. Do that right now at www.thehub.ca. Thanks for watching and listening. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.